Get ready for that big test with Study.com. Study.com offers learning materials and test prep, even LSAT study prep guides for all of my legal nerds listening. Unfortunately, there aren't any wine study guides, and believe me, I did check. Listeners can get 30% off their first 3 months of any subscription level using the promo code CrimeOverWine. Again, that's promo code CrimeOverWine, no spaces, for 30% off your first 3 months at Study.com. Learn faster, stay motivated, study smarter with our sponsor, Study.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 54th episode of Crime Over Wine, the only podcast with head-scratching true crime stories that are just better over a bottle of wine. I'm your host, Liam Collins, and this week, my guest co-host is the new queen of Nashville, new queen, a Tennessee news legend, in my book anyways, and just one of the most wonderful humans probably ever. My guest co-host this week is Lori Mitchell. Hello, Lori. How are you?
What an introduction.
You know I had to, only for you.
Thank you, Liam. You are so sweet. It is so good to hear your voice.
Oh, I am so happy that you're here. Lori, we've been talking about this for so long, I feel like, since probably almost just about a year that we've been talking about you jumping on this podcast, and so it's finally happening.
Yeah, life has gotten busy. We've both made some big changes in our lives.
Yeah.
I've moved, but I'm happy we could finally get this on the calendar, and what a perfect time to do it around the holidays, just so we could reconnect and kind of see what each other has been up to.
Yeah. Well, Lori, let's celebrate that with a nice little glass of wine together. Are you ready for this?
Yeah. Cheers, my friend.
All right. Excellent. Well, this week we are drinking 13 Celsius's Pinot Grigio, a bouquet of floral aromas leading to flavors of luscious pear and ripe tropical fruit with a crisp, lively finish. I'm getting summer vibes from this one, I feel like, as opposed to like a nice like winter Christmassy kind of feeling. So
I love it, though. It's super light.
Yes.
It's easy to drink. I love a Pinot Grigio any time of the year.
Yeah, so true. Well, what's typically your go-to? Are you a white gal, red gal?
I like both.
Okay.
You know, usually white in the summer, red in the winter,
Same.
but I tend to do more white than red, I would say.
Interesting.
And I love champagne.
Oh,
like
I
good
do love
dry
champagne.
brut.
You know, I haven't done. Oh, I do love a good dry brut too. I haven't done a champagne on this podcast yet, and I feel like I need to. I feel like I'm like saving that for like a good milestone episode, though, like 100th episode. Like I feel like I have to, right?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. But I've got to say, 54 episodes. That's incredible. Good for you.
It flew by, Lori. It flew by. Well, cheers to you, Lori. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, this is fun. Thanks for having me.
Ooh, okay. Oh, that tastes like a Pinot Grigio if I've ever tasted a Pinot Grigio before.
It's really good, though.
It is very good. You're very right though. Very dry, very light to pear. 100% crisp, lively finish though is a very good way to describe that too, because that is just like is very, very smooth, just goes right down.
Yeah, love it. They also make a Sauvignon Blanc, I saw.
Really? Oh, yes. I think I did see that in the store. You're right about that.
Yeah, we'll have to try that one next time.
I know. Next time around. Oh, she's already talking about next time. We're
maybe
only 5 minutes
the 100th episode. We'll have you back.
Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. Never know, right? Well, Lori, I have to dive right into our case this week, though, because I have a crazy one. It's going to leave you kind of gripped on to the edge of your seat here, but it's worth it, right? Because it is one of those cases that you're not going to be able to forget. Lori, this week, I want to tell you a story about a teacher that was met with one of the worst endings for a reason you simply will need to hear to believe. This week, I want to tell you the story of Nohema Graber, Fairfield's Spanish teacher. This week's story takes place in Fairfield, Iowa, pretty much right between Cedar Rapids and the Missouri state line. The 2021-2022 school year was 66-year-old Nohema Graber's 10th year working as the local high school Spanish teacher. And she knows Spanish so well because it was her native language. Nohema was born in Jalapa, Mexico, nicknamed the Flower Garden of Mexico. But teaching Spanish was hardly always Nohema's dream job. When she graduated high school, she worked as a flight attendant and then earned her license as a commercial air pilot. But in one way or another, life brought her to Fairfield, Iowa in 1992 when she got her certificate to teach in the state. 20 years later, Nohema got a job as a Spanish teacher at Fairfield High School. At this point in life, she was living a really quiet lifestyle. She had 3 kids, a wonderful husband who had suddenly found himself relying on Nohema as the primary breadwinner. Nohema's husband of more than 20 years had been disabled by extensive nerve damage to his leg and feet, and so she was the one who was financially able to keep her household afloat.
Yeah, so it seems like Nohema was in a really good space. You know, she had a job that she enjoyed. This was kind of part 2 of her career.
Right.
She was doing what she loved and obviously something she was really good at. And what a happy place to be doing that in a high school full of energy and kids who are excited about life and full of hope.
Yeah. Well, and listen, so I know, like, Lori works in a school, like we love our teachers, right? Like, I come from a long line of teachers, hardly my dream job, right? Like, not what I want to do in any way, shape, or form. Couldn't be me. But like, if that's what you're going for, and like, she seemed as though like this was just like where life took her, right? And it's just like we've all been there, right? Where it's just like, one thing happens, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a place maybe you didn't think of 20 years ago, and that seems to be kind of the situation that Nohema kind of found herself in, where it was like she imagined her life as one way, but life took her a different way, and she wasn't mad about it, wasn't happy about it. It was just, this is how life is.
Yeah,
and that's
she was
the way life goes.
Embracing where she was in life and doing what she had to do to support her family and take care of her husband.
Yeah, and in a really important way. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. But one can only imagine what it was like to have to bear this kind of burden, right? Like being married to a disabled husband, having to bring home all the bacon. It must have been like a massive stress, especially considering your way of providing for the family was teaching, a stressful career as is. Plus, teachers are not exactly known for raking in the dough necessarily. So Nohema had this routine to stay healthy and to relieve the stress of the day. She would leave work and drive right to the local park, where she would listen to music and take a walk around the park, soak in the nature and the fresh air, and just clear her mind. And, when someone has that kind of routine, their loved ones expect them to do certain things, right? Leave work at this time, call home at this time, come home at this time. And on November 2nd, 2021, that routine was off because Nohema never returned home from her usual walk after work.
I think she was also a little bit vulnerable. Yes, to your point, your loved ones know your routine, your pattern. They knew when to expect her home. But also, if someone was wanting to do something bad to Nohema, they also know where she's going, when she's going to be there, and where to look for her.
Yeah. And, because someone said this to me once, and I was like, whoa, you're right. Because but like humans are very routine, like whether we like to think about it or not, right? Like I, will regularly, stop home at the grocery store on the way home from work, pick up stuff for dinner. And so, I don't really think about that because typically I'm deciding to go to the grocery store, on my way home from work. I'm not this isn't part of my routine kind of thing. At least I don't think it is, but it is, right? Because that's kind of just the way things roll. And so point being is, if that's people, it's almost like instinctual kind of thing, as opposed to a thing that you're planning out to do. It's just kind of yep, like a normal thing. I'm just going to go to the park and take my little walk after school. Everything's cool. Everything's dandy. And in a town like Fairfield, Iowa, right, where it's, large town, small city kind of feel. It's that feels right. That feels okay. That we're gonna do this, and I should feel safe enough to do this because I've done this 100,000 times before, right?
Yeah, obviously a false sense of security there.
Yeah, a little bit. So, when the time Nohema always comes and goes, and then hours go by, and by this point darkness was falling, that's when Nohema's family gets really concerned and decides to call police. So officers retrace her steps when they get this call, from the school to the park, looking for any sign of Nohema, and they don't really find anything at all at first, not even her van, which she always used to get around town, including to the park after school. So while they continue searching around Fairfield for that van and for Nohema, some officers decide they're going to hang back to search through the park for any sign that she had ever even made it there to begin with. And as they're searching, the night of November 2nd turns into the early morning of November 3rd. And that's when they find something peculiar, something just a little out of place here. They find a wheelbarrow overturned with what looks like a tarp underneath it. And so they decide they're going to go to investigate, and they lift the wheelbarrow to see railroad ties securing something underneath that tarp. And when they untie the railroad ties and peel back the tarp, they find Nohema Graber dead and badly beaten, just absolutely black and blue, Lori. Nohema had been beaten to death by what looked like a blunt object.
So at this point, did they have any clues about, who would want to hurt her? Did she have any enemies?
Yeah. Well, so that's obviously like natural place, right? Police immediately begin an investigation into what happened to Nohema. And of course, they look at who Nohema's enemies may have been. From what I can tell, they rule out anyone in Nohema's family pretty quickly, right? Like that's the very first place you're going to look, especially the spouse. But Nohema is a pretty prominent Latina in a small but growing Latin Hispanic community. So they even explore that as a possible motive, that as a possible avenue, but don't really come up with much to support that. And as they start asking around Nohema's school, two names come up through the halls of Fairfield High School, and along with it, a pretty strong amount of evidence. Crime Over Wine is sponsored by BetterHelp. As someone who's used therapy for years, I know that finding a therapist can sometimes be a stress on its own, juggling your full-time job, your family, your friends, your podcast, and trying to find the right therapist on top of that can almost feel impossible. That's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp matches you with a therapist that works for you on your terms. It's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to one of 33,000 licensed professional therapists in as little as a few days. And because finding a new therapist is a lot like finding a new bottle of wine, if you don't jive with your therapist, you can easily switch to a new one at no additional cost. You can get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp by going to betterhelp.com/crimeoverwine. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/crimeoverwine for 10% off your first month. Join over 4 million people who decided to get help and get happy with BetterHelp. Those two names are 16-year-old Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale, both students at Fairfield High School. Now, those two names come up through messages that were sent on the social media app Snapchat that had come to police's attention.
So what did the messages say?
Well, they're messages that may have seemed a little eyebrow-raising at first, Lori, but are purely spine-chilling once word gets out about what happened to Nohema Graber. The messages are from Willard and Jeremy and appear to show the two teenagers straight up admitting to killing Nohema. Here's what they say. The messages are threatening in nature and directed straight at Nohema. The messages basically admit to having been, quote, involved in the planning, execution, and disposal of evidence related to Nohema's case, according to law enforcement. Investigators called the messages very graphic in nature, detailing how the murder had taken place, and those messages had apparently gone on for weeks.
And so apparently police know who did it. They don't have to look anywhere else. They are zeroed in on their potential suspects right there.
Right. Well, and this happens like literally like within a day or two. They get like these messages a day or two after they end up finding Nohema. And so everything's happening very, very quick. It feels like it's happening very, very quick in the episode, but it's happening like just as fast, it feels like anyways, in real life. And so, yeah, I mean, that's pretty damning evidence, on its face, right? Of like here are a couple of kids, like not being great murderers, right? Where like they're, like letting it all hang out. So.
Right. What did they think would happen if they had this conversation over Snapchat or text messages? I mean, were they thinking? Clearly not.
No,
they didn't plan this out very well.
No, again, worst murderers ever, I feel like, again, because, like, hello, like, we're, 20 minutes into this episode, and we already know who did this, right? I mean, it's already pretty clear. But no, you're very, very right about that. And, like, again, like, not that this really matters, because, like it's, at the end of the day, like, don't murder people, but, like, also, like, don't like, be careful about what you put in writing, right? Like, I feel like we've heard that so many times, like, especially like me growing up when like social media was like just becoming a thing, when like we were all kind of like coming to age of like being able to like use social media. And like it was like drilled into our brains about like, be careful what you put online, be careful what you put online. And again, like, moral of the story here is like, don't kill people, but like more like also more of the story here is like, because like, let's put our hats on about like Willard and Jeremy are innocent, right? Like, at the very least, it looks real bad if they're like
Right.
threatening to kill the woman and like she happens to end up dead, you know, even if they didn't have anything to do with it. So
Yeah. They're also so young,
yeah,
and they're not thinking, and they're also just being careless. They're comfortable texting and
yeah,
Snapchatting and letting everyone know everything about their lives. So
yeah,
why wouldn't they
right.
talk about it on the phone?
Sure, and like careless and kind of callous, like if you think about
Yeah.
it, of like they like from the perspective of like they actually did do this thing,
Yeah.
like you are just bragging about it to your friends on
It's very
Snapchat.
sad.
Very sad, very very sad. You know, but the messages alone are, of course, enough to make investigators super interested in Willard and Jeremy as suspects here, of course. They bring them both in for separate interviews. Now, they both give wildly different stories, though, but interestingly, neither of the teenage boys deny having any direct involvement in the case, but they don't openly admit to having been the one to have killed Nohema.
Interesting. So, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, at first, Willard says that a gang of masked kids whom he and Jeremy had come across at the park forced them to help hide Noema's body after they had killed her. And he said they were terrified, so they went along with the whole thing. But then they are presented with the text messages that police have, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of this investigation and this interrogation, the story changes.
Mm.
Suddenly, the gang of masked kids are out, and they say that they claim to have had, quote, knowledge of Noema's murder, but didn't have anything to do with it directly. But police present them with new evidence about Noema's van. By this point, just 2 days after Nuima's body was found, they had found the van down a remote road just a few miles from the park. And a witness had already told police that they saw the van driving away from the park just 42 minutes after Nuima would normally arrive at the park for her walk around 4 o'clock. And it was being driven by two young men who, the witness said, matched Willard and Jeremy's descriptions.
So, just 42 minutes. So, they knew where she would be going
Right.
after work. They knew her routine, her pattern. She was a creature of habit, and they planned
Yeah.
this.
Well, yeah, and let's not forget, and like we're gonna get to this a little bit later on, Lori, but like when they're talking about the messages, like the messages like had gone on for weeks, right? Like, and so
Mm-hmm.
like there were lots of different conversations about this, and so point being is they had decided that they were going to do this a long time ago, and so to your point here, like they did their homework, you know, for kind of a bad pun, but it's true, right?
Yeah, it is true. And I mean, sounds like premeditated murder to me, first degree.
If I've ever seen one, right? Well, you know, that wasn't all either, though, Lori. They had also received emergency warrants for Willard and Jeremy's phone records. And that showed a call made to a friend that apparently resulted in a ride from that friend. And where the call was placed and where the pickup had happened were both in the same location. And that location was the exact same remote street where Nuima's van was later found.
I mean, if you're using a cell phone or technology or you have a car with GPS, you're going to get caught.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter
Especially
of
these days.
time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, like going back to like dumbest murderers ever, in my opinion, but like
Sure.
again, like the evidence is stacked up against them, right? Because like normally by this point, again, we're 20 minutes in, we have so much more to talk about, but like at this point in the episode, we have multiple suspects, we have multiple, you know, possible motives, multiple possible theories here, and at this point, we are just pointing like right at two people, and like all the evidence is supporting that.
Such young people with their whole lives ahead
Right.
of them.
Right. Well, yeah, and it's like Noema, right, who had, you know, was older, you know, certainly not older than so certainly older than 16, but still had a lot of good life to her, right, and like had, you know, a career where she, you know, in what I consider public service, you know what I mean, like she had a lot going for her as well, and
Hmm.
and you know, again, like if you're a little perturbed right now, Lori, just give it a couple minutes here, because we're going to talk about some wild stuff that ends up popping up from this case. So hold that thought big time. You're going to need another glass for sure. Well, investigators had clearly already put all of the pieces together, just like we're doing here, Lori. They just needed to see what Willard and Jeremy were going to say during this interrogation. And they were budging, but not by much. By this point, they had resorted to blaming each other, saying that yes, they were there, but they were only an accomplice, and the other one had dealt the fatal blow. They had simply served as lookouts for the other, helped hide the body, and moved Nohema's car after the murder. But police weren't buying their stories, and frankly, they had no reason to. They were both arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a forcible felony. They were being charged as adults, which was automatically triggered under state law when a minor is charged with the charges the two teens were facing.
Yeah, as they should be charged if they're
Absolutely.
guilty of this crime. Absolutely. Okay, but Liam, this is all kind of moving quickly. Why did they even do this?
Well, Lori, investigators end up pointing to a pretty intense motive. And I promise you, Lori, you're going to need to keep that glass handy for this one.
Hello, Crime Over Wine listeners. I am Rachel.
And I'm Heather.
We are the hosts of Like Mother, Like Murder.
We bring you the good, the badass, and the crime.
Each week, we bring you stories from missing and murdered
to survivors and women who empower you.
And of course, some mom talk sprinkled in.
Check us out wherever you get your podcasts at Like Mother, Like Murder.
And give us a follow on social media so that we can say hi.
Okay, love you, bye.
Okay, love you, bye.
Crime Over Wine is proud to support Emancipet. Veterinary care shouldn't be a mystery, and neither should your pet's health. Emancipet's licensed veterinarians have answers to all of your pet questions. In the Vet Ed video series, veterinarians break down topics from spaying and neutering to protecting your pet in cold weather. Learn more at emancipet.org and watch Vet Ed on the Emancipet YouTube channel. All right, Lori, how was your wine tasting? Need to know.
I am loving this. This is such a good treat tonight. I'm glad you suggested this.
Yes. Love it, right? Well, and it's very relaxing too,
Yeah.
I feel like, because normally with white wines, I'm like triggered a little bit. I'm like when my energy gets going. And this is like very much so, it's like easy to sip on, like we're just like having like chit-chatting, having a good time. And it's like I'm barely even noticing I'm drinking wine, honestly, but I'm almost done with my first glass. So
Yeah, it goes down very easy. So I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but hey, whatever. I'm going to feel good tomorrow morning when I wake up.
Yeah, we're going to find out tomorrow, right? But hey, with people like us, Lori, like, it could be a good thing or a bad thing. We're just we're all going to find out at some point, right?
It tastes good now, though. That's all that matters.
It sure does. No, but I really do like it. And again, if I go for whites, I typically go for a Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc, and typically I feel like probably more so Pinot Grigio. But I'm really, again, just it's simple. It's again, like very traditional Pinot Grigio here. You're not getting anything crazy, not getting anything like too like out of bounds here, and I'm really enjoying it.
I would definitely buy this again. That's how much I like it. I would recommend it to a friend.
5-star endorsement from Lori. Love that. Fantastic. Well, Lori, we left you on a pretty intense cliffhanger here. We're about to find out why Willard and Jeremy may have killed Nohema. And so you want to get there?
Yeah, let's get to it.
All right. Well, investigators had ended up using those Snapchat messages that we've been talking about this whole episode to figure out that the duo had been planning this attack against Nohema for weeks. And they alleged that the duo had been watching her every move for 2 weeks to learn more about her routine and to see when she would be at the most vulnerable place. They learned about her daily after-school walk and plotted the exact day when they would kill her. And they did all of this, Lori, because Nohema had failed Willard in her class. And that bad grade was apparently going to prevent him from being able to participate in a study abroad program.
So they killed their teacher because he was afraid he wasn't going to be able to participate and study abroad?
Yep.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable, right? Yeah. And like, again, like, so, because I have a couple different thoughts here, right? Like, obviously, like, not that there's ever a good reason to kill somebody, but like the most ridiculous reason that I've ever heard to commit murder, right? Because like, you have ruined three people's lives, multiple people's lives, actually, because Nohema's whole family is like shattered from this whole thing over a bad grade. It's like, do some extra credit, kid. Like, what do you like? I don't understand that. But like, also, again, to be clear, like, it's just a Willard that ended up failing. Like, I never saw like Jeremy having been failed in any way, shape, or form. So it's like, where was his motive? Like, how did he even get involved in this whole thing? That's really not clear to me at this point. Listen, like kids and teachers can have real tense relationships. You know what I mean? And so especially with that kind of like generational difference.
Right.
So I can only imagine like what was going on inside the classroom, besides just like the failed grade. Like they clearly had this like real tense relationship leading up to this whole thing. So,
but where was this kid's moral compass? Both of their moral compasses. I mean, they weren't thinking big picture, long term, this is minor, right, I can work through this. He was just looking for what he thought would be an easy solution in the moment.
Yeah. Right. Well, and again, like, not even just that, but like they were like basically bragging about it on the back end. And so it was like there was zero emotional capabilities here whatsoever. You know what I mean? And so, like I would love to hear like a psychological evaluation on these two kids, because like it's gone. Like the morality here is out the window. Like definition of like gonna murder somebody probably again if they didn't get caught this time.
Well, that's a great point too. Do we know anything about their past behavior, or had they been through the juvenile justice system? Had they had issues at school? Was this a first time offense? I mean, so many questions.
You're right about that. And like that's a good point, because those are usually good indicators. But as far as I could tell, Lori, no. Like as far as I could tell, that there was no kind of like, they had good home lives, like everything was good, like didn't really get in any serious trouble at school, that kind of thing. Like this was really like the first time that anything really crazy happened, as far as I'm aware.
Wow.
So
it's too bad
for both of them. It really is. Yeah, it really, really is. But Willard, during this whole conversation about this grade, had apparently met with Nohema after class, and it wasn't a good conversation. Apparently, it got into a really intense argument, and that's when those violent and threatening text messages had started. They seemed to openly admit to having been watching her every move in those messages, and they were threatening to do something bad to her in those group chats with their friends. One of those messages had apparently even said that Nohema had, quote, failed the wrong student.
Oh, wow. That does sound very threatening.
Yeah. Well, and again, like kids say dumb stuff, you know what I mean? Like from that perspective. And I would be curious to know what the messages in response were. You know what I mean? Because I'm, at some point, like you respond and you like egg it on to a certain extent, you know what I mean? As opposed to just like letting him just like relieve all of this like pent up aggression.
Yeah.
Like you probably, so I'd be curious to know how these kids like responded to this whole thing. Clearly, like, again, to be clear, like once Nohema had passed, like they brought these messages to police's attention. Like they did pretty much everything they were supposed to do. But I would be curious to know like maybe how bad the messages were before they killed her. And like whether or not anyone could have been alarmed from those, and like if those should have been brought to someone's attention beforehand.
Right. She may still be alive today.
Maybe. Yeah. Again, I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, maybe they just they didn't get to that point until after she had passed, maybe. But like there clearly were, very intense messages and very, graphic in terms of like talking about how they were following her and stuff, which is like obviously inappropriate. Right. And so like clearly there was something there that like, should have gotten someone's attention, but like we're talking about kids here. Right. And so they don't always think with the best judgment. So I don't know. It's just interesting. And like, again, I always live by this like thought of, and like probably at some points like a little too intensely, but like, see something, say something, right? And like if you see a message that just is not adding up to you or is not sitting right with you, you gotta say something about it.
And you just have to wonder if she noticed anything a little off those last couple of weeks of her life. True. Had she seen the students following her? Had she noticed anything out of the ordinary when she went on her daily walk at the park? And if she did, maybe she thought, kids just being kids.
Right.
They're trying to intimidate me, but she didn't think they were actually serious.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and again, like I say it again, I take this a little bit too seriously sometimes in terms of like, keeping an eye out on my surroundings and like, like writing down like license plates, like just in case when like they don't end up actually like turning into anything, but like one day they may.
Sure.
And so to that point too, where it's just, you gotta have that kind of, awareness of yourself. For sure. And like you were saying, maybe she did, maybe she didn't, right? Like maybe she, like, it never rose to that point, and up until it did, the teen's attorneys argue that the messages should be thrown out in court, among other evidence, because they believe the investigators didn't prove that the informant that they had used to get the warrant was reliable enough to be able to follow through on that. And so, therefore, just about all of the rest of the evidence should also be thrown out because they wouldn't have brought the boys in if they didn't have those messages to begin with.
Well, that's their jobs. They're doing what they can to try to protect their clients. But at the same time, I think that the message kind of spelled out what happened, and they were turned over to authorities, and, prosecutors need them. I don't see a problem with having them admitted into evidence.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, me neither, really. And like, but to that point though, like the argument that they're trying to use is like dictionary definition of like fruit of the poisonous tree, right? Where it's like bad tree produces bad apples, and all the apples around it can't be used because the tree is bad. And so that's clearly the argument they're using. I feel like that's probably the first time that we've talked about that on this podcast. And so important to note there. I think probably a poor example of it, right? Where it's, it's kind of what you were saying before, right? It's like from the horse's mouth of like, here are these messages, here are the like the student is giving it up, and like it's all happening. But to your point too, right? Like you have to use as much as you can to try to get people off, you try to get your client off until you don't have anything left.
Yeah.
Well, the judge ultimately disagreed with the boys' attorneys and ruled that all of the evidence would be kept in court. And frankly, that seemed to be the moment that the defense teams decided to give in. Because in April of 2023, just days before the case was scheduled to go to trial, both of the boys decided to plead guilty to all of their charges.
I think it would have been very difficult to find a jury that wouldn't have agreed that both committed the crime.
Yeah.
There was a lot of really solid evidence, and they probably took their attorney's advice and said, hey, this is our best chance, so take a deal, save yourself from going through a long, painful trial, and probably the best thing for everyone.
Yeah. And again, we see that, all the time in these situations where it's just you've exhausted all of your options, right? Where it's like you've used all of your defenses, all this stuff, and frankly, we've seen it so many times too, where it's like, even if there's still like a little bit of haziness as to who did it, like the evidence is so strong where it's just like, you're better off, man. Like you're better off taking a plea deal. And like, again, I don't think this is the situation here at all, just to be crystal clear, but like, where it's, you're better off taking the plea deal as opposed to going to a trial. Because if you take the plea deal, at least you might be able to get a lesser sentence. Whereas if you go to trial, like you're at the will of everybody else,
Yeah. And they're so young too. I mean, there's a chance that maybe they'll see the light of day and be able to get out a little bit earlier.
Right. Well, and we're going to talk about why the law kind of backs that up a good bit too, in just a second too. So definitely hold that thought, Lori.
Okay.
Well, they both pretty much admitted to all of this entire crime: the bad grade, the weeks of stalking, the text messages, and the brutal attack. Jeremy had already agreed to testify against Willard if the cases went to trial, however, and he already had given some more detail to how it actually all played out. Jeremy testified that Willard's jokes about this whole plot were getting darker and darker leading up to the day of the attack, but both went through with it. Willard had apparently brought a wheelbarrow from his own home to the scene of the attack, which was corroborated by a witness who said that they saw the boys pushing a wheelbarrow around the park shortly before midnight the night of the murder. Jeremy said that Willard attacked Nohema with a baseball bat first, and then moved her body off of the trail, but Jeremy followed Willard's lead when he noticed that the blow hadn't killed her. He said that after she was moved off the trail, he took the bat and finished her off. Afterward, they put her body in the wheelbarrow to move her body to a spot near the railroad track where they covered her lifeless body with a tarp, wrapped it with railroad ties, and put the wheelbarrow on top of her and left her there to be found just a few hours later.
This is so disturbing. I mean, this is a teacher who cared for them. She was trying to make a difference in their lives. I mean, sometimes you need a little bit of tough love at that age if you're not applying yourself. And she probably saw potential in this student and wanted to help him succeed and push him to do better work.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And especially, frankly, again, it sounds like these kids needed some guidance in their life, right? Like needed an adult to lead them along the way. And here's like an adult who is responsible, been there, done that, like has been through hard times and like could have like, been a mentor or like, been a friend or a role model in some way, shape or form, or even just a teacher, at the very bare minimum to like guide them through like, the weird feelings that they were having at like weird ages. And so, yeah, I mean, just like what a callous way to do this, right? Where it's just, it's so personal, it's so brutal, and it's so like, and like, again, I think about, guns, knives, that kind of thing, like kill someone almost instantly, right? Like that's just how that works, right? But with a bat, like you don't know, right? Like you just don't know. And so like, and clearly, like who knows like what kind of injuries you could have inflicted on a person and then have them like you think that they're dead, but like in reality their heart had just like slowed so much and like who knows how much she could have suffered after that. So anyways, I don't know, I don't even want to think about that, but like point being is like the way that they went about this is so intense and dark, right? Like so dark.
Yeah, and just to knowing her family situation, like this is a woman who is getting up every day. She's going to work. She's trying to like help children who, maybe want to pursue a goal in the future, and she's there for them, like you said, to kind of guide them along the way. But she's also trying to provide a living for her husband who's unable to work, and you have to believe they knew that and didn't take all of these things into account. It's just incredibly sad.
It sure is. Yeah, and like I keep going back to the fact that Jeremy had nothing to do with the situation in terms of like the motive behind it, right? Where it was he just went along with the whole thing and like according to this story like finished her off, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of like this weird situation where it's like Willard, like if you think that this motive is justified, which I don't, to be crystal clear, again, not that there ever is a good reason, but this is certainly the worst reason ever, like where he like went after it for whatever reason he had. Jeremy didn't have any reason, any solid reason, at least from what we're going off of here, to actually like follow through on this whole thing. And Willard like seemed to be like, again, if we're going with like he's just like a deranged kid kind of thing, like went after her and like didn't even, in my opinion, like seem to be like the most like involved person in the actual attack, if that makes any sense, right? Because like he attacked her first and Jeremy finished her off. Yeah. And so it's like, and frankly, Jeremy could have just like sat back. Jeremy could have saved her life, to be first of all crystal clear, but like Jeremy could have just like sat back and just like watched it all happen and had plausible deniability in this whole thing, but instead he followed through on it and ruined a whole bunch of lives in the process.
For someone to not really have a motive, but then to do that, it's there's a lot more going on with Jeremy than we realize.
Absolutely. With both of them.
For sure.
Realize. Absolutely. Well, Iowa state law, kind of what we were talking about before, Lori, prevented a mandatory life sentence for minors, but both teens were sentenced to life in prison. Willard would be eligible for parole in 35 years, and Jeremy would be eligible for parole in 25 years. In July, when Willard received his sentence, reporters described him as emotionless. Yet he apologized to Nohema's family briefly before apologizing to his own. In November of 2023, when Jeremy was sentenced, it was a night and day difference from how Willard appeared at his sentencing. A total 180. Jeremy was sobbing and apologizing profusely directly to the family, saying, quote, "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. What I've taken can never be replaced. Every day I wish I could go back and stop myself, prevent this loss and this pain that I've caused everyone," end quote. The judge said he would have considered a mandatory life sentence for Willard if the law had allowed it, calling his actions sinister and evil. The judge did say that Jeremy seemed to him to be much more likely to be able to rehabilitate, however.
I think it is a good sign to see some remorse. Sometimes you don't see that at the end, or
Nope.
ever. So it seems like at some point someone got through to Jeremy and he realizes he made a terrible, terrible
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah. Well, and like I kind of imagine it, like again, it doesn't make it better, but like that's kind of how I imagine it happening, right? Where it's just like Jeremy and Willard were buddies, right? And like Willard was like, "Oh, I'm gonna do this," like blah blah blah. Like maybe Jeremy didn't even really take him seriously up until it was
The
actually
moment.
happening. Just got like carried away with this. Like that's like again, like just like thinking that it was just like dumb kids being dumb kids, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my god, what did I do? Right? Like maybe I don't know, and like maybe I'm totally wrong, but also if that's how it happened, then like you own up to it right away, right? Like when police come up to you and like and question you about what had happened. So maybe that's not even the case. But point being is like I keep going back to the fact that Willard had the motive, right? Like had the reason to do this whole thing. Jeremy didn't. And it's like we see kind of how this whole thing ended up playing out in terms of like how they're reacting on the back end of this whole thing when Willard is just like dry and like clearly like either couldn't care less or like just didn't like wasn't capable of showing emotions in any way. Like it was clear that it like hadn't really sunk in for Willard, at least from like my opinion from watching him talk, whereas Jeremy was just like a mess. And like whether it was for Nohema, whether it was for himself, like knowing what he was gonna have to do for the rest of his life is yet to be seen. But like point being is like two different paths here, two totally different paths.
Yeah, so it's easy to see why the judge, decided, hey, maybe this person is able to be rehabilitated. And the other one is callous, void of emotion, has shown no remorse. So we're going to choose a different sentence for him because we don't know that he's going to turn his life around.
Yeah. Well, and again, like 35 years, like not really all that long for murder, but like Iowa state law, at least at the time, I don't know if it's changed since then, did not allow you to sentence minors to life in prison, period. And so that's kind of where we're at. And so I think my understanding is that the judge gave Willard like the most he could give him, and like that's it.
Yeah, he'll be in his 50s by the time he's eligible for parole.
You seem to be better at math than I am, but so I'll
think.
believe you. I will believe you.
A long time.
A long time.
A very long time.
I can do that math for sure. But both of the teens were also ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution to the family, but I mean hardly enough, right? I mean, geez. So the family confronted Jeremy and Willard at the sentencing, explaining to them how much they had taken from them. They admitted that Jeremy did seem remorseful, but they questioned his authenticity. Plus, they said the teens had taken more from them than they even knew. In March of that year, just days before the teens had pled guilty, Nohema's husband had died from cancer. According to the Des Moines Register, he had been depressed and sad and hopeless after Nohema's death, and the family blamed both of their deaths on Willard and Jeremy, saying he had basically given up without Nohema there to help him fight the cancer.
It sounds like he died of a broken heart.
Yeah, right.
And this was his person, the love of his life, his caretaker, his provider, his everything.
His life partner. Yeah, no, you're so right about that. And like going back, like again, talking about, I just can't like listen. Not that these kids have like more than $150,000 period to like toss around and like give up, to the family, but $150,000 for someone who like an entire life period, but like somebody who was providing for an entire family, you only give $150,000. That I just can't even imagine what that math was like. Talk about being bad at math. I can do math well enough to know that that's too low,
It seems like a very small amount when you look at the crime and the pain and the damage that was inflicted upon that family.
Yeah. And again, I don't know how this is calculated ever. Like, I just don't. But like, I don't know. I just can't imagine what formula added up to that in any way. But neither here nor there, I suppose. Right?
Yeah. I don't know. It's a heartbreaking story, but thank you for breaking it down for us. This has been very interesting to be part of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Lori. Man, I'm like still wrapping my head around it. I feel like we kind of like got off very quickly and then ended very quickly in this case. But man, I mean, because there's not a whole lot of detail packed in here because we, again, like kind of, it was, 2 + 2 = 4 in terms of like figuring out how to do it. And it was 2 + 2 = 4 to figure out how to like prosecute these guys. But I mean, I just still feel like it's so important to tell these kinds of stories, even though there aren't a whole lot of details there, because like Nohema's, story needs to live on in some way, shape, or form, right? And like we can do that here. And so I think that's cool, that we are able to do that and to tell this story, when, again, a lot of podcasts probably just going to ignore it because there aren't a whole lot of details to talk about here. But important, still very, very important to carry on her legacy and to share her story and how she lived and how she died.
Yeah, her life mattered, and she was doing great work, and she was a great person for her family, and she was obviously, helping a lot of kids at school, following a passion, and it's just too bad that it ended this way. But hopefully someone will learn a lesson from all of this, and, think big picture. Don't think about the here and the now,
right.
And I think that's the moral of this story.
Yeah, sure is. And it has to be, right? Like there has to be some sort of moral here, moral of what we're talking about here. And like I just keep thinking back to like, and like I don't know, maybe this doesn't even apply here, but like maybe it does. Of like if something just seems off, if something just is you're getting these weird messages from like your classmates and things just aren't like adding up, like you have to say something about that. Like you have to bring it up to somebody, like to an adult, and say, hey, like this is not, like there's something weird here, like he's saying these weird things. Like you have to, if you see something, you have to say something, like otherwise who is, right? And like maybe it would have saved Nohema's life, maybe it wouldn't have, maybe the signs were there, maybe they weren't, but like point being is like somebody's got to be looking out when the people who need someone to look out for them can't look out for themselves.
Yeah, that would be a hard truth to live with for the rest of your life, knowing that you could possibly have saved someone else's life if you had just spoken up.
Yeah. Well, and like I keep going back again, we talk about this all the time in the podcast, where it's just like bad things don't happen, right? Like bad things don't happen to me, bad things don't happen in my town, like bad things just don't happen. And so I would imagine that their mentality, right? Especially when you're that young and like you haven't really seen the world, the way that like, you and I have, Lori, where like you haven't really seen those things, where it's just like, oh, like that can't be, like they can't be serious, right? Like they can't really be stalking Miss Graber. You know what I mean? Like they can't really be like, threatening to beat her with a baseball bat. They just can't. And they just must be like, taking it a little bit too far, saying things they don't mean to say. It just has to be like that, right? Obviously that's not what happened. And so so point being is like that had to have been their mentality when they're that young and that naive, right?
Yeah, and bad things do happen. I mean, turn on Dateline or 2020.
Oh,
I think
right.
I think just
or the nightly news, right?
Right. I think just working in the news makes you a little bit more prepared in some ways.
Yeah,
also
absolutely.
a little bit more cynical in other ways. But sometimes, it's good to have your eyes open. It's good to be watching your surroundings and seeing if someone's following you, because it does happen to people. We have reported on it many, many times.
Yeah. Listen, people, make fun of me all the time for being a little paranoid, but I'm gonna be your girl when things really hit the fan, right? Like things like I'm gonna be that guy with the pocket knife and the pepper spray.
Oh, for sure.
Y'all are gonna be sad. So
you have to be. I mean, unfortunately, it is the world that we live in.
Yeah, so true. Yeah. So true. Well, on that great note, Lori, that is all that we have for you this week. So thank you so much for coming on this week. It's been a pleasure. You're such a gem.
Oh, it was so fun to catch up with you. It has been way too long.
Sure has. Well, again, that is all that we have for you, Lori. It's been a pleasure. So tell everyone where they can find you and your work online if you'd like.
Yeah. So, I'm still on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can find me. I'm out there, just not on your TV early in the morning. I'm sleeping past 2:30 a.m.
Love that for you. What a time. Love that. It's a different lifestyle.
It totally is.
Well, thank you again so much for coming on, Lori, and thank you all so much for listening. We're going to put all of our sources on our website so you can read everything for yourself and probably come up with a few theories too. And if you are just loving this podcast and are just looking for a way to tell everyone and anyone about it, the best way to help people discover this podcast is by leaving us a 5-star rating and a review wherever you are listening right now. So make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're wondering what we have in store for you next week, here's a quick sneak peek.
Hello, everybody. It's Liam.
And I'm Chip Alford from the podcast Home Where You Belong. I'm entering the crime vineyard next week with the story of a flawed investigation that complicated the search for a black teenage girl from Chicago. and a major discovery sends it in a new direction.
It's a frustrating case, but a very important one, and you'll hear all about it, every single detail, next Wine Wednesday on another episode of Crime Over Wine.
Proud member of the Podnuga Network,